Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of Warren Harding, and the focus is from the paper to politics. The year is 1895. Harding has recently gotten married. He's really grown his little paper, the Marion Daily Star, into much more of a thriving business. He's become a prominent member of the Marion community and a leading member of the local Republican Party, in part because his editorials in the Star always leaned Republican. He had become one of the founding members of the Marion's Young Men's Republican Club. The problem was, if he was ever going to get into politics, his county, Marion County, was Democrat leading, so it was going to be hard to break in. He was at the Republican Convention, the local one in 1895, and he was a little upset because no one was even going to be willing to run for one of the offices that was open. It was a position of the county auditor. He thought this was a defeatist attitude. Sure, it was going to be tough to win in their Democratic county, but somebody's got to run. He raised his hand and said, "You know what? I'll run." His fellow colleagues said okay. He ran. Not unexpected. He lost badly. But in typical good cheer for Warren Harding, he looked on the bright side. He told his wife, "Real success is often built upon preliminary failures, spurring on to greater achievements." That optimistic tone, typical of Warren Harding. Now, Harding also became a popular speaker in the state of Ohio, getting out of his own county and starting to meet people from across the state. There was, in Ohio in the summers, they had every year the Chautauqua Speaking Circuit, where people would go around from local town to local town and make speeches. And Harding got onto that circuit. He would go for several years. Very much of a pro-American patriotic kind of address was typical for Harding. Often would talk and tell stories about one of his heroes, one of the founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton. Now, Harding knew, though, if he was going to have a chance to win political office, he had to go broader than his Democratic county. So for that, he had the district, which was 4 counties coming together. The Ohio 13th, that leaned Republican, as did the state, at least at this point in Ohio's history. So this year was 1899, and Harding decided to make a run for the state Senate. And again, that would be elected by the combination of the 4 counties. He barely won the Republican nomination, and then at the district level, he campaigned hard across the entire district, and he got his first political win. He was going to start spending time in Columbus, the state capital, where he would be a state senator. And one thing he had to take care of, though, was his newspaper, still the lifeblood of his life, the Marion Daily Star. But fortunately, about 5 years before, he had hired George Van Fleet, who, like himself, learned every piece of the paper, of the full operation, heavily focused on the reporting side, the news side, the editorial side, and whenever Harding had to be in Columbus for state business, Van Fleet would run that side of the paper. What about the business side? Well, he had his wife, Florence. She had already sort of started running the business side of the paper. She had a better knack for that than perhaps even he did. And so they had this balance between Van Fleet, Florence, Harding. They would run the paper while Harding was out of town. Now, Harding was this outgoing people person. He was a good fit in the state Senate, good relationships with his colleagues, not just the Republicans, but also across the aisle. Now, he was a very reliable party line Republican voter, but friendly to all across the state house, not only at work, but on the golf course, the poker table, like getting together with his colleagues to smoke cigars, swap stories, that sort of male bonding fellowship. A reporter once wrote at the time that it was not long before Harding was the most popular man in the legislature. He had the inestimable gift of never forgetting a man's face or name. He was a regular he-man in the sign manual of those days, a great poker player and not at all averse to putting a foot on the brass rail. He was popular. He also was good at his job, but not as a traditional legislator. He did not really get into the details of much legislation. He only introduced a handful of bills. Most of those were very specific to some things that he wanted to get done for Marion, but he was very effective behind the scenes. You could think of Warren Harding as a harmonizer. He would bring people together, cut through some of the antagonism, and help try to get stuff done. At least that's what Governor George Nash said about Harding. He said, "There may be an abler man in the Senate than Harding, but when I want things done, I go to him." And in politics, that's pretty high praise. Now, in Ohio, there was really a system of rotation in office where you didn't get a lot of chance to repeat in the state legislature. In fact, in the county in the district that Warren Harding came from, nobody had repeated in the state Senate in over 50 years. But Harding was very popular, and there were people pushing him to run again. The party eventually agreed, and he was reelected to a second term. And this would be a little bit different because 2/3 of the senators were all new. So he was now all of a sudden one of the elder statesmen here in his second term. He became the floor leader of the Republican Party, kind of a Republican spokesman, but he's really still continued that harmonizer role much more than sort of the hardcore legislative role. That was the best there was for Warren Harding. Now, nationally for the Republican Party, things were a little bit problematic after the turn of the century. So Ohio's William McKinley had just won re-election, Harding a big supporter, but in September of 1901, he was assassinated. And now incoming was Theodore Roosevelt, the youngest president of the United States, came from New York, and he brought some new ideas. The progressives were really starting to come around at the turn of the century. People who believed that government could be even more forceful and engaged in trying to do good things for the American people, and Theodore Roosevelt was a champion of much of this. But it was really creating a schism, if you will, within the Republican ranks, both nationally and in the state of Ohio. Now, where did Warren Harding sit in this? He was not one of these leading reformer progressives. He was more of what was called a stand-patter, kind of a conservative, old guard Republican. And again, this divide was really going to grow in Republican circles over the next decade or so, and Harding would be much more on the conservative, old guard side than ever on the progressive side. Now, Harding knew there would be no third term for himself, but he wasn't really done with state politics and really wanted to run for governor. But politics in Ohio, the Republican Party, were complicated. The two senators from Ohio at the time were Mark Hanna, who had been so instrumental in getting McKinley elected president, Mark Hanna from Cleveland, the northern part of the state, and then there was Joseph Foraker, the other senator, former governor of Ohio. He's from Cincinnati, the southern part of the state. Harding was aligned with Foraker, but Hanna had more control of the state operating party at the time, and he was pushing for Myron Herrick to run for governor. So that was going to edge out Harding for that job. But kind of a compromise to the Foraker folks, they said, well, let's put one of your people in for lieutenant governor. For that, they picked Warren Harding. So Harding is running on this ticket. This election cycle was a strong pitch for the Republicans in the state. And at the age of 38, Warren Harding is now the number 2 man in the state as lieutenant governor. Now, this was an even better fit for Harding, in fact, because there were really very few responsibilities to be lieutenant governor. He was the president of the Senate, but that was really just a presiding officer role. He was not a legislator. He didn't get to really vote on anything. He got well positioned to be that conciliator in the background, the harmonizer that he was so good at. This was really on display at the Republican convention in Ohio in 1904. Again, the party is fracturing in Ohio along two lines. You got the old guard versus the progressives, plus the Hanna folks versus the Foraker folks. In stepped Warren Harding, gave a speech, really tried to kind of bring the party together as they were trying to pick the delegates for the national convention for that year. And the Cleveland Plain Dealer wrote, "The man who stepped into the breach today was Lieutenant Governor Harding. By the use of a rare flow of words, the lieutenant governor for the moment made the delegates believe the word harmony had been written with indelible ink. If the enthusiasm this afternoon is any criterion, Lieutenant Governor Harding is destined to figure in an increasing extent in the future councils of the party." Very true. Well, in the next cycle, Harding really did want to run for governor, but Herrick wasn't interested in standing down, so what did Harding do? He said, you know what? I'm going to take a break from politics, head back to Marion, got a good life there, I've got my newspaper, and besides, this was probably a good decision since Herrick lost in kind of a swing back to the Democrats in this next cycle. So what did Harding do? Jump back into the Daily Star. He's a little bit more of a publisher now than just the editor, really trusting Van Vliet to run the paper on a day-to-day basis. But look, he was still out there talking to people, getting stories on the street corner. He belonged to almost every fraternal organization in town. The Elks, the Red Men, the Hoo-Hoos, the Old Fellows, the Odd Fellows rather, the Moose. All but one, for some reason, the Masons had kind of blocked Harding, which he wasn't very happy about, but just about all the rest, all part of being a leader in the community, and it all got reflected back in the newspaper, which was doing well. He was able to buy his first car, a big status symbol at the time, traveling those rails on the free passes with his wife Florence, visiting different parts of the country. Things were good. Well, again, the Republican Party beginning to fracture as Roosevelt's second term came to an end. He left. Handpicked successor was Ohio's William Taft. Harding, again, a big supporter of Taft. But once Taft got in there, the progressives, the big followers of Roosevelt, very unhappy with the way Taft was leading the party. So a big split sort of going on in the party. And in Ohio, Hanna had died. Foraker was a little out of favor because he had sort of gotten involved with John Rockefeller of Standard Oil, and that didn't go over well. So in 1910, a little bit chaotic for the Republican Party, both nationally and in the state of Ohio. And once again, Warren Harding wanted to run for governor, and along came Harry Daugherty. Now, Daugherty had become Harding's friend. He was a former politician himself, but had really become a lobbyist and a political operative in and around Columbus, where he had kind of a rough reputation, a little bit on the dirty politics side, very different in that regard from Harding, but they had become very close, very friendly. They loved to socialize together, play poker, and Daugherty was really pushing Harding to run for governor as well. So Harding wanted this. He got in, got the nomination for the Republicans. He's up against the incumbent, the Democrat, Judson Harmon. Harding was aggressive, crisscrossed the state, gave about 300 speeches preaching Republican gospel. Like usual, he tried to stay away from the most controversial topics. That wasn't his thing. One of those was prohibition. This was being talked about a lot, especially in the rural sections of Ohio, which favored prohibition. Now, Harding himself was kind of on the fence. He was a casual drinker himself, didn't really necessarily think personally this was a good idea, but politically, he tried to straddle the line, not talk about it, but just a couple weeks before the election, he was pinned down, and this is what he said. The temperance question is legislative rather than executive and is not to transcend all other important issues in this campaign. My legislative record is written in the journals of 2 general assemblies. I couldn't change that record if I would. I stand for enforcement of the law and would not be worthy of your suffrages if I did not. So where did he stand? Nobody really knew for sure, other than he was going to enforce the law if he was elected. Well, this was not to be. The party was divided in the Republican circles in Ohio. A lot of the progressives basically stayed home, and it was a Democratic sweep across the state. This was not good news for Warren Harding. He lost the governorship by about 100,000 votes, an 11-point margin of loss, which is a pretty big margin, but that was okay. He got it out of his system, basically said, oh well, back to his good life in Marion. And he told his wife, now Duchess, which was his long-term nickname for his wife Florence, now Duchess, we still have our wagon hitched to a star, and we will keep right on running the newspaper and make a trip on the salt seas to bury our sorrow. And sure enough, they did. Took a trip to the Mediterranean with a couple of their very close family friends, Jim and Carrie Phillips, also with the Phillipses, another trip to the Bahamas, focusing on the star. But more politics, always right around the corner for Warren Harding. That's a story for another day. That is Warren Harding, from the paper to politics, from the life of Warren Harding. For more presidential chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.